Can't get enough of us. Okay, here, look. Thanks to Deputy O'Brien for bringing forward this bill, which we support. When there's, in Dublin, 2,700 Airbnb short-term lets being advertised, but there's only 400 or so, or slightly over 400 long-term lets, you know the government's policy is failing yet again. So despite some efforts being made to limit or regulate this area, they just haven't worked. And we have those who are pursuing profit from property simply ignoring the rules, and we don't have a regime to do anything about it. So these measures at least will attempt to address that problem on the issue of spot fines and forcing the estate agents or other platforms that would advertise these short-term lets to at least try and establish if the short-term let is actually within the planning regulations, and to issue spot fines to give the power to establish the power to issue spot fines to those who don't do that or who are doing short-term lets when they're not within the law. So I agree with that. Personally, though, I think we need to go further because it's an emergency. And we agree, this House agreed that we had a housing and homelessness emergency some time ago, but we just don't act. The government most certainly doesn't act as if it's an emergency, although it pays lip service to it. An emergency means you do unprecedented things to address an emergency situation. Now, I just think it is personally obscene and immoral that in the teeth of this crisis, if we had a functioning housing sector where we didn't have 10,000 households in emergency accommodation, if we didn't have 20-year-long waiting lists for social housing, if we didn't have rents that, the vast majority of working people can't afford, and house prices, the vast majority, then, we could operate in a different way. But in the teeth of this incredible suffering that people are going through, we need emergency measures. And I think Deputy O'Callaghan is right. In the areas, in the epicentres of the housing crisis, there simply shouldn't be these short-term lets available. They shouldn't be allowed when we need people to be housed properly. Families, children who need housing. I mean, today I have, again, a woman who's a case I've raised many times, but she's just one of many, but it's just because I received the text today, who's just telling me how her youngster, who's 11 years old, is now seeing a counsellor, psychological counsellor, to assess the impact on his mental health and the trauma that he suffered as an 11-year-old child because they are 3.5 years in emergency accommodation. And she's been thrown off the housing list because her income is too high. So she's not even entitled to HAP now. And her child is suffering, damage, right? Now, the idea that there's other people then making money out of short-term lets, when that family needs a secure place to live, it's just obscene, in my opinion. It's obscene. And we need emergency measures. Whatever we might do in a different moment, in a functioning housing sector, where the state had actually built sufficient public and affordable housing, and so on, we might operate in a different way in terms of these things. But in the face of an emergency, you have to do unprecedented things, and we need to start doing them. My view is this short-term letting should not be allowed, full stop, in the areas where the housing crisis is focused, right? Which is in Dublin, in the major urban centres, in Cork, Waterford, Galway, Waterford, whatever, right? Shouldn't be allowed, in my opinion. So that's one thing I want to say. But I also, seeing as we're talking about advertising, just to highlight something else, Cherrywood really drives me insane, right, the development up in Cherrywood, because it's the biggest residential development in the state. It's a new town, basically. The state put in the Lewis, it's on the N11, millions gone in infrastructure up there, and for a brief period we had it in public hands in Nama, but we flogged it off to developers and speculators and so on. And now they've actually finally, more than a decade later, housing is starting to appear there, there's apartments and so on. And one outfit who were drawn to my attention this week is a crowd called Halley Apartments. Halley Apartments, hadn't heard of them before. Offices down in Mount Street. Advertising studios for €1,500, single bed apartments for 1,800, and then going up from there. Right? So, not exactly cheap advertising. But it gets worse. Two people come into me this week, both working, both on reasonably decent incomes. Like one young woman is earning $3,000 a month and does another job which earns her about another 500, 600. Fancy advertising for Halley Apartments. Another man in the same boat. And they email them and they say, yeah, I want to rent one of your apartments. I could just, and then they're told, yeah, we're pre-approving you. And then over weeks, in fact months, they're told, emails back and forward, oh yeah, you're progressing brilliantly, just send us your bank documents, send us your this, send us your that, it's all looking good. And then at the end of the process, this crowd just turn around and say, actually, we're not giving it to you. We're just not giving it to you. No explanation whatsoever. And these people are absolutely gutted because they're so desperate for places. But they looked up one of the directors of this company, and in a tweet, I think it was, or a post, they were talking about how they were very glad to be doing work with big corporations to house their talent in some of their apartments. So I'm thinking, is a new twist to the housing tale that these apartments are being let en masse to big corporations who then come in and gazump the ordinary individual who's been engaging in good faith with these companies, trying to rent them, but they're just gazumped because the company is only interested in money, right? And that is the problem with our whole housing policy. Whether it's the short-term lets or whether it's this kind of behaviour, these people cannot be let dictate our housing sector. The availability of rental property and so on, the state has to dictate.
Thank you, Deputy.